Welcome, TKA. We're appreciative of the time that we've had together in talking about race here at the King's Academy, and I want to thank our panelists for joining us and contributing to this discussion. Today, we're going to wrap up with some question and answers from our panelists. The questions were provided by you through your home groups, and we're eager to hear what the panelists have to say as we continue this discussion, this family discussion about race and the King's Academy. Okay, well, let's start off. One of the questions we received from the students was if any of you had wished that you had embraced your culture earlier than you have.
For me, yes. The answer is yes. I was adopted from South Korea when I was 3 months old. I'd mentioned that before. And my parents tried to do a really good job of like incorporating my Korean roots into my childhood. They bought me like Korean coloring books and Korean dolls. But for some reason, I was a little resistant to that because I just wanted the white Barbie doll. I wanted Barbie and Ken, and I wanted, all of the kind of, I thought normal things. I even avoided Korean food. Like I would sit at the table when my mom would try and make us Korean dishes, and I would like throw a tantrum. And I wish now that I had done it sooner because first of all, Korean food is good. And I wish that I had had some more, develop deeper roots at a younger age. But I think I just wanted to try and fit into my surroundings a little bit more.
Okay.
I think I can certainly appreciate the fact that your mom tried to make Korean food for you to make you feel more at home.
Yeah.
That's very respectable. I think for myself, growing up in a very Chinese community, my parents really tried to impress upon me, the values of being Chinese, and being that, their English wasn't great, being that they weren't raised here in America. So growing up, I thought, America was the cool new thing, right? Dad and mom, get with the program. And I wanted to be just like my American friends, instead of my mom making me lunches for school, I wanted to eat the school hot lunch, even though it was horrible, right? I insisted that my parents pronounce words right and things like that. But and I hated going to Chinese school. But I think looking back now, there is definitely an appreciation for the diversity that it has brought. Look back at it now, and obviously, I think, I wish that I had taken more advantage of it. I wish I had appreciated it more back then.
Okay. Good. All right, another comment or question that came up was how common it is for you to experience, whether overt or implied racism, judgments people make based on your appearance.
And yeah, I don't think it's, I guess I would define racism as really being intentionally obviously biased against somebody because of how they look. And I think that is less common than it may seem, or I'm not sure how common it seems that it is, but I don't find it to be something that happens often. I think there are more instances of, like what we'll talk about later, these microaggressions and people just maybe not being aware of what is or isn't something that you should maybe apply to somebody when you're talking to them for the first time. But I would say racism, like how often do I experience that? I mean, not often. How often do I experience what I would call like a racially maybe insensitive statement? I mean, I can't really put a number on it, I guess, but that has happened enough that I remember those instances where it has happened. Whereas, I would take racism, and I feel like that's like another level above of like really trying to just be like harmful and mean to somebody, which isn't the case, 99% of the time, I feel, at least in my experience. I know it's not for everybody else's, but at least for me.
I think for me, when I was younger, I experienced racially insensitive comments. Again, I grew up at a school where I was one of the only Asian kids. And so I just remember one time something very vividly that stood out to me. I was a softball player, and I remember I was playing third base. We were in PE, and I was like, this is my time to shine. And there were some girls that just made fun of me because I was really into it, and they called me some other names, but they started to make fun of my face, where they were like, oh, you're your face is flat and your face got smashed by a boat. And I was like, I didn't know what they meant by that. And then I didn't realize that like, apparently that's a common joke that Asians have flatter faces. And so I just remember that kind of stuck with me. I think into my college and adult years, it's not that I experienced racism, but I do feel like sometimes I wonder if I didn't get a job or I wasn't liked even by a guy, like because I'm Asian and a female. And I'm not saying that I didn't get those things because of that, but it does make me wonder, like, does my race or even my gender play a part in that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
How you're
Yeah.
viewed, yeah.
Kevin, you had mentioned the term microaggressions, and maybe you could define what you mean by that, and maybe some examples of those.
Yeah, and I guess I look at a microaggression, I would kind of parallel that with like being kind of racially maybe insensitive. I guess I guess it would be like applying, a stereotype to somebody without the intention of being malicious, but just applying a stereotype to somebody that they didn't earn, I guess I would say. I would never want somebody to have to defend or like rebut something, right? Because it's assumed that I am X, Y, or Z because of my race, right? So I think one of the more common ones that I've dealt with in my life, and even surprisingly, I saw it on TV on the show Survivor as well, is like black guys in do-rags, right? Like there's the joke that's come up, multiple times in my life and on this show where it's assumed that, hey, where's your do-rag? What kind of do-rag do you have? What color? Where is it? And like all these, jokes that seem harmless. And again, and I call it a microaggression because the intent isn't malicious, but it's just a small, maybe stereotype that you apply to me when I grew up. If you were wearing a do-rag out in public, that was associated with being a thug, right, or a gangster. I think I talked about that last time about, the being a black man, you're trying to, or I guess one of the stereotypes that I was fighting against was that I was a thug just because I was a black male, right? And one of those stereotypes that comes along with that is a do-rag. Now, wearing one does obviously make you like bad or good or anything like that. It just means that you own one. But 100%, like if somebody were to ask me that, they would associate it with, the typical black guy is, your pants are sagging, you've got a do-rag, and you don't talk very, you don't speak very well, right? And so those three things have come up often for me. And I guess if somebody were to say to me, hey, where's your do-rag? To them, it just seems like, oh, I'm just, making a joke because I know black guys wear do-rags. Whereas to me, I'm trying to distance myself from the assumption that like a black guy is a thug, right? Because the do-rag is associated with being a thug. For whatever reason that is, that's just why it is. And I think it's those things that somebody may not realize why it's called like a microaggression, right? It's like you're just making an innocent joke that you might think is just you trying to even relate to me of like, where's your do-rag? Whereas in my head, I'm like, gosh, like I know that you're associating that with your image of what a black guy is, which is just wearing a do-rag and walking around with his pants down. And that's not what I am, right? Like I would rather you ask me who I am and figure out who I am as an individual rather than assume that, I have a do-rag or I do X, Y, or Z. So I guess that's how I've experienced in my life, and that's what I think kind of the intent, not the intent, I guess maybe more of the context behind it is as to why these have become more of an issue, because I think even with some of our students are like, well, I'm not a racist, and even if I just make a joke, it's just a joke, right? And until you understand like why that joke might be harmful to somebody, you won't like you just won't get it basically. So yeah, that's kind of my.
It reminds me of last time when you guys were up here and you mentioned that your friends had said to you, Kevin, you're like the whitest black guy I've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even something like that makes an underlying assumption of what a black guy is supposed to act like or behave like. So,
For sure.
And I've definitely been guilty of saying similar statements. So it's a good thing for me to be more aware of the way that I talk to even my friends, even if I have no ill intent towards them.
Right.
But what if you are, let's say you said a black guy wearing a do-rag, but you weren't the stereotypical thug.
Right.
What would you say to that student that's like, or person?
I mean, I guess if I was wearing my do-rag, like out in public, you know, I guess I would still say the goal is not to assume like anything about somebody just
Yeah.
based on how they look, right? If they're wearing a do-rag or not, if they, you know, I mean, like, yeah, I guess the goal would be to not judge somebody just for the way they look. Because again, I could wear a do-rag and I'm also not a thug, right? Those two things can both be true. And so like some parts of our culture are associated with being a thug, and that's just the way it is. And until that changes, you know, it's not going to be a little bit different. I mean, LeBron James wears a do-rag during some of his interviews, right? But nobody thinks LeBron James is a thug, I don't think,
right.
you know? And so I think, but anyway, I guess that's kind of the end goal, is to try and, you know, let somebody be judged for who they are as opposed to implying something on them.
Yeah, and I think your example kind of highlights the idea that this implicit racism or even unintentional microaggression, it does alter the way you behave, right? I mean, you mentioned that you wouldn't necessarily wear a do-rag out in public because you were trying to avoid, you know, the stereotype of the, you know, the thug.
Right.
So I think that illustrates for us how even little subtle things like that can impact not only how a person perceives themselves or wants to be perceived, but also their activities, you know, their behavior. So.
Yeah.
I've grown to realize that when we talk about racism and whatnot, it's somebody else's opinion projected
Right. Yeah.
on me, right? It's their judgment. You kept saying judgment, and I've started to realize that like I'm the only person that can control my actions and my thoughts. So I don't need to worry. If you're going to judge me, that's on you. But what I need to do is I need to figure out who I am, how I am rooted in Christ, and to try and be confident in that. And yeah, that's harder.
Easy to say.
Easy to say,
Right.
harder to be done.
Right.
But like, if I sat there and worried about like, oh, is he judging me? Am I not getting this job because I'm Asian or black or whatnot? Then I'm gonna go crazy. So all I can really do is think, who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And everybody else, I think sometimes we let society put on these stereotypes to us, and I just need to stay focused and figure out who I am.
Right. Good. Excellent.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and here is a question, and I think from a sincere heart, what qualifies as being a racist statement? I mean, where do we draw the line? You mentioned, they may have said it trying to be humorous, you know, and I've heard the comments that, oh, we've lost our sense of humor as a society. But where is that? I mean, and obviously there's probably not a hard and fast line, but where is that line between just, you know, having fun with a friend versus, you know, crossing over into, you know, overt racism?
Yeah. And again, I don't think it's, like you said, it's not like a line in the sand in particular. I mean, some things are obviously completely inappropriate to say, and I think hopefully we know what those are. But I think again, it comes back to intent, right? Even if, like, somebody could make the joke to me, you know, where's your do-rag, right? But if somebody said the same thing with a different intent, I mean, it could be considered racist for sure, right? And I guess it really depends on the person, and you may not know that. Like, I may not know that, or anybody who experiences it may not know that, because there's a lot of, I think, I guess it's not necessarily a fine line, but I think it depends a lot on the intent. What I've seen mostly in society today is just people not being aware, right? Or it's just like, oh, I didn't know that was offensive, and they'll even apologize, right? Like, oh, I'm sorry. And that is nowhere near racism, I think, because to me, that, like, to be racist is to want to look down or look poorly upon or judge negatively somebody just for how they look. And I think There are fewer of those interactions today than there used to be, for sure. I mean, there still are some, obviously, because people are people. But, again, it's hard to draw a line besides the obvious, like, things you don't say to somebody, like a racial slur or something like that. But I think a lot of it just has to do with intent of what you're meaning behind it. And that can even be felt sometimes, too, right? Like, if I'm, like, pointing and saying a certain thing at you as opposed to, like, saying it as a joke, they could both be harmful, but one definitely is meant to demean, while other one, might be, just a little bit naive or something like that.
Okay.
So,
I think one of the things that I appreciate you guys bringing up earlier was the difference between overt racism and like implied racism, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, there are things that can be said that are blatantly racist, right? I mean, you think about, how things were back in the civil rights era, right? You're on the wrong side of town, or whites only, or whatever. Those things are clearly racist, and I don't think anyone will argue against that. However, I also do think that right now we are in an era of hypersensitivity when it comes to race, and the way that we see it, the lens of how we see everything right now is completely based on race. So our own experiences are defined through this lens. And I was reading an example earlier this week of, how it's like a bug being entangled in a web, and the more that we move, the tighter it gets. And basically now everything has become so, microscopic, where we're just inspecting everything that's being said to us through this, is it racist or is it not racist, And I agree with what KJ said about intent. I think that goes a long way, but I also think that it's worth pointing out, we know the one who sees the heart of men and women, right? And we are not that. I am not that. So it is not up for me to say, does this person have ill will or racist intent or anything like that, because I'm basically placing a presumption or a narrative on them. And in the same way, I don't want people to make assumptions about me for who I am. I think it's important for us as believers to also, not place these kinds of, I don't know. I think the accusation of being racist is very serious, and it gets tossed around a lot lately. And so I think before we start to label this and this as a racist, or this person and this person as a racist, it's very important, like Dana said, for us to inspect ourselves, make sure that we're in the right place. And even then, the way that we manage it and the way that we handle it is extremely important.
Yeah.
I feel like there is also this culture now where we feel like we need to convert everyone into our way of thinking, our worldview, and because of that, it's created a lot of tension, and the more that we add to this, the world is racist narrative, everything that you say is narrative. I've had one bad experience with a white person, and that must be because he's racist narrative. We're adding logs to a fire that's already, getting out of control. So,
I think another thing that, again, we're the controller of our own actions. And I think one of the things that we do to harm this topic in society is if we, like me as an Asian person, I'll make jokes about Asians because I'm Asian. And that's actually not okay. Like, oh, I'm allowed to say that word or, make this stereotype because I'm Asian too, or I'm Black. And I think sometimes a lot of the reason why people make those jokes is because they're actually insecure. That's why I make Asian jokes, is because I feel insecure about it. I think that, using the N-word, if I said it, I would be labeled a racist. But then I also think that needs to be like a two-way streak. One of my biggest pet peeves is when Black rappers use the N-word. I don't think that's okay. And I don't think you would use that word either, right? And so it bothers me that there's almost this double standard. And again, I think that if we're going to control our own actions, then we need to make sure that what we're saying is honoring about ourselves and about others as well.
That's a good point. Excellent point.
Yeah, for sure.
So how, in your experience, you've mentioned that you have experienced at times, whether it's implicit or explicit racism. What advice would you give to our students on how can they deal with a situation where they feel that someone is being racist toward them? What's the proper response?
Again, I think obviously the who has something to do with it, like I mentioned last time when we talked, I had friends, that would say, again, dear friends I still have to this day that said stuff to me that was, pretty racially, I guess, insensitive, making jokes about, oh, Kevin, you talk so well. Why don't you use blah, 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 whatever, And again, with them, I would have said, what I should have done, I didn't, is this like, hey, I don't really appreciate when you say things like that to me because it implies that I'm X, Y, or Z, And I think, again, with talking, I think the intent and the who, I think, is important, right? Again, if it's your friends, I think it can be assumed, hopefully, that they're not trying to just be a jerk to you or they're not trying to actually put you down. They may just not know that what they're saying is harmful. And that's where you can just go to them and just say, hey, I don't appreciate when you say this. And hopefully the response is, oh, I'm sorry, I never meant to offend you. I thought we were just joking, right? And then, again, it's their action after that that's going to determine whether they have taken that seriously or not. And so yeah, I think it doesn't need to be a big deal, right? I mean, it doesn't need to be this monumental, oh my gosh, you were this, that. I mean, I think it can be handled calmly in the same way that if somebody made a joke about, I don't know, your mom that you didn't like, right? Hey, don't make jokes about my mom, right? In the same way you can bring the same thing up. It's just a little bit different when you have to defend not your mom, but who you are as a person, right? When you have to stand up for oh, now, I have to tell this person why it's not okay for them to say this because I'm black or I'm Asian or whatever it is. And that's just a little bit different for the person has to bring that up. So I would say if somebody brings that up to you, I would recognize that that's an uncomfortable situation for that person and just to take it seriously and not as kind of like a joke, because I think even sometimes high schoolers trying to make amends can become really jokey, right?
Yeah.
It can become kind of silly, but if somebody were to bring that topic up for you, I would take it seriously and know that they probably want you to stop. So,
when somebody's hurt me and I go to them, it's an awkward situation. And I've seen oftentimes people get on the defense. Why? I didn't mean that. I didn't do that. I'm not a racist. And I don't think that's what the person's trying to say. I think that it's just, this is how I'm feeling. And I think oftentimes we go on the defense, but just to be listeners and hears and try to understand. I said that a lot last time. Seek to understand the other person. I think that's important.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. I think today, as well as in previous panels, you've mentioned that, and Dana, you've mentioned this morning about finding our identity in Christ, who we are, right? We're not Caucasian, we're not Asian, we're not black. I mean, that's true, but that's not at the heart, at the core of a Christian, that's not who we are. Our lives are hidden in Christ, right? So how do you communicate that effectively? How do we help our kids to see that our identity is not in our behavior, it's not in our ethnicity, but it is rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ and what he means to us? Any ideas how we can communicate that more effectively?
So when you start to feel uncomfortable, or your feelings are hurt, or you're doubting yourself, we're feeling unrest, right? And the opposite of unrest would be peace. So we want to feel peace in being content in who we are, or peace with friendships, peace relationally. And I've been doing this Bible study this week was talking about the need for peace. And I think that is kind of the key. And what I would tell students is that in order to kind of get rid of the insecurities that you have to find a state of peace. And it's praying. It's being with Christ. It's I don't know, he's the only person that you said that's the judger of that. And I think that if we can seek to find this peace in Christ, I think that's going to transform how we think and view of ourselves.
Right.
I know that's kind of the Christian cliche answer, but like honestly, when no one likes to feel unrest, right? Or like unpeaceful. So like what steps do we need to do? Maybe even like practical steps for you to find peace would be to run. I don't know why anyone besides you and Tompkins would want to run to find peace, but like for me, it's sleep or like honestly watching TV and eating food that makes me feel good. But then I've realized that those are trivial, small things, circumstantial things.
Right.
But if I want to find deep-rooted peace, it has to be in Christ because I believe in Christ and I believe that He's the only one that can give me that kind of peace and understanding.
Yeah, and just right off of that, I think the reason, at least today, that I don't feel as, I don't know, jaded towards society, I think is because I've always, or at least since my sophomore year of high school, I've known who I was, right? Like I've had this relationship with Christ that has showed me that like I am more than what society may think I am, or my identity can be in something that is unchanging, right? And I think that's more of like I can find that rest in, knowing who God is and knowing that like I am with Him, and like the things that happen in this world outside of that are all, good, bad, and in between, they kind of are what they are. You're going to have good days and bad days, but I think it's just been so good to me to know that even on my worst day where something bad happened to me or whatever, I can know that I ultimately have a God who loves me and I have relationship with Him. And I think kind of understanding more of the freedom to be who I am, knowing that like I'm now, or just knowing how God sees me, I guess, has allowed me to not be so sensitive when somebody makes a joke that they shouldn't, right? If somebody says something, innocently, and it just triggered me a lot, that probably because I'm a little bit too sensitive, because people say insensitive things, often, right? And it would be, maddening to get like overly emotional about every little thing somebody said. But I think kind of understanding who I am and who God is to me has given me the ability to be like, okay, yes, like hopefully somebody can learn, what, a race or an insensitive statement is, or even a racist statement is, and not, or somebody can learn what that is and hopefully not do it again. But again, if they say that to me, that's not going to make me feel less about myself because I know how God views me. Yeah. And I think that's where I've been able to come back to, even on bad days with it, of just like being able to be there. And again, having good community around me that's been able to like support me in general. So.
I think kind of along the same lines, but hearing you guys talk has made me realize maybe in a very privileged sense how well I've had it. I mean, I'm proud to be Asian. I'm proud of my heritage, and there's really not much that you can say to make me feel ashamed of who I am, right? And so with that, I think it's a blessing. It can also be a very callous statement, because the fact of the matter is words and actions from others can really affect us, can really hurt us. But I do feel that my ethnicity is but a very small facet in a beautiful diamond that God has made me to be, right? And so, yeah, right now, I think the spotlight, the conversation really circles around this particular facet. But, if someone were to come up to me today and, say something insensitive or what I deem to be racist, I mean, you don't know. I'm a diamond, like I don't really care what you have to say, right? And so I think having that sort of confidence, not in the confidence of my ethnicity or my heritage, but the confidence in who God has created me to be, who He has developed me to be through this process, has been essential to the way that I see myself in this whole narrative. So, one of the things that I really wanted to just continue to point out too is, this need for us. I think it's important. I've taught my son this. I took him to one of the protests early on because I wanted him to see like not so much the division between blacks and whites at the time with George Floyd and all that, but I took him to one of those things and I told him, I was like, look around you, there's white people and brown people and, Mexicans and black people and Asian people and old people and young people, and everyone is together right now to share a common message that we need to treat each other with love and respect. And I think it's important for us to speak out against injustices, but I also think it's important for us to not be so focused on this crusade of, condemning and pointing fingers at everyone that we feel like has said something even that might be misconstrued as insensitive or racist. So, yeah, again, kind of going off what Dana said, our focus, where we focus our spiritual eyes is essential during this time.
Good. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing is what we're really talking about here is the gospel, right? That God so loved the world that he gave his only son. That's how he views us. He views us as value, of intimate worth, and he gave his only son for us. And that's what gives us identity. That's what gives us meaning in life. And so it sounds cliche, like you say, David, doesn't it, right? But it really is the gospel of Jesus Christ that rescues us from racism and insensitivity to other people. That God rescued us. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And that's the gospel message. And that's, as we experience racism, as we even sadly participate in racist words or racist actions, we have to remember that at the very core of our being is we are deeply loved and accepted in Jesus Christ. And so is that person that we may discriminate against. That is a person created in the image and likeness of God and is of unestimable value. And so this has really been helpful to us. I think it's been a blessing. I think, one of the questions was, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And I think talking about it, right? Have open discussions like these, and you sharing your experiences with the entire student body has been very valuable, I think. And I pray that it will bear fruit in the days to come. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As we end chapel today, we would also like to acknowledge that America is likely still awaiting the results of the presidential election. Pastor Herman Hamilton from New Beginnings Community Church shared an interesting thought that I thought I'd share with all of you. If you look at Jesus' disciples, even among his 12 disciples, there were two who were on opposite ends of the political spectrum. Matthew, the tax collector, he worked for the Roman Empire. On the other end of the spectrum, Simon the Zealot, his sole political goal was to overthrow the Roman Empire. Yet these two men were both called by Jesus, loved by Jesus, and used by Jesus. And somehow their love for the Lord and for kingdom work transcended their political agendas, and they were able to further the kingdom. So there's a thought to leave you with, and I pray that we would continue to follow hard after God, to remember that we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven first, and may God continue to bless America.